Today at 1, a British man who killed his seriously ill wife walks free from a court in Cyprus. David Hunter was cleared of murder but convicted of manslaughter. And today the court decided he has spent long enough in custody.
I can't describe it. I'm sorry. I wish I could. I wish I could find words to describe it. I can't.
Thank you.
When you're under pressure for 2 years, wondering which way it's going to go, you don't know what to think.
Well, Mr. Hunter had told the court that his wife Janice had begged him to take her life because she was in so much pain. Also this lunchtime, teachers in England from the National Education Union vote to accept a 6.5% pay rise and to call off industrial action. The government expands North Sea drilling for oil and gas. Campaigners say it flies in the face of the science on climate change. And Australia lose wickets on the final day of the final Ashes Test. But can England level the series?
And coming up on BBC News, co-host Australia look to avoid elimination from their home World Cup. They need a result against Canada in Melbourne. We'll be live with the latest.
Hello, good afternoon. A British pensioner who killed his seriously ill wife in Cyprus has walked free from court. David Hunter was found guilty of the manslaughter of his wife Janice at their home. Mr. Hunter had told the court that she had begged him to end her life because she was in so much pain. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison but was released because he has already spent most of that time in custody. From Cyprus, Fiona Trott reports.
Stunned. This is the moment the retired miner never dared to imagine.
I can't describe it. I'm sorry. I wish I could. I wish I could find words to describe it. I can't.
Thank you.
When you're under pressure for 2 years, wondering which way it's going to go, you don't know what to think. I would like to say thank you to all the people who've donated to me, and especially my mates, my workmates. I didn't know where I would be without them. I hope I'm feeling the same as my family. When I'm talking about that, I'm talking about all my lads. We're all a family. When you work in a colliery, we're a family.
And that family, thousands of miles away in Northumberland, were overjoyed that David Hunter was finally free.
Absolutely ecstatic. I couldn't, if I won the lottery tomorrow, I wouldn't feel any better than I felt when I got that call today. It's just absolutely brilliant. I mean, everybody, you could sense the emotion in the whole group. It's what we've been working for. It's what we've hoped for, what we've wished for.
This is the Davy they knew, the lucky man who retired to Cyprus, but the wife he adored. But here inside their home, Janice was suffering. She had blood cancer, so David killed her and tried to take his own life. He admitted what he did and was found guilty of manslaughter last week.
We think it was a fair decision and one in line with the interests of justice. It's a pity he spent so long in prison, but he's really looking forward to getting out, and now this allows for him and his family to properly grieve.
Absolutely wonderful.
Janice was at the centre of his world. He's now walking into a world and into a life without her. His friends say that's punishment enough.
And for his punishment, this is what the judges said they had to weigh up. The unique personal circumstances of this case, a case which they may never see again in Cyprus, they said. But also they wanted to stand out this message: no one can choose when someone's life should end. Now, outside court, you heard David Hunter say that he hopes his family back home in the UK were feeling the same way he was feeling. Well, I can tell you that they were. His daughter, Leslie Cawthorne, told us that she was in tears. She was elated. She actually managed to have a video call with her dad. And now her dad is able to visit her. He's free to visit her, free to visit that mining family he was talking about back in the northeast of England. But most importantly this, free to go to the village where he and Janice lived. It's where she's buried, and he hasn't been allowed to visit her grave until now. There's a tough road ahead for him, but his friends who are in court here in Paphos and back in the UK, and his family say they are all ready to support him.
Fiona, thank you very much. Fiona Trott reporting that. Members of the largest teaching union have accepted a 6.5% pay rise for teachers in England and voted to end their campaign of industrial action. The National Education Union had staged 7 days of strikes in state schools in England since February. Well, Hazel Shearing is our education correspondent and outside a school in Leeds. And Hazel, this has just broken in the last few minutes. Just bring us up to date on exactly what the union have decided.
So it's summer holidays, so it's quiet here outside this secondary school in Leeds. But back in February, there were teachers out here with banners, donning woolly hats on the first of those 7 national strike dates that you mentioned. So the 4 teaching unions involved in this dispute have been going back to members to ask whether or not they'd accept the government's pay offer. The National Education Union is the second to have come back. It's an overwhelming yes, and it says it won't be holding more strikes next term. This is the result that many parents, pupils and teachers will have been anxious to find out, and that's because the National Education Union is the only one to have actually held strikes during this dispute. The union says it will continue to fight for more funding in education, but for now there's a collective sigh of relief for many that children are likely to be able to go back to school in a few weeks' time without further disruption.
OK, Hazel, thank you. Hazel Shearing there, our education correspondent in Leeds. Now, production of oil and gas in the North Sea is to be expanded. The government is offering hundreds of new licences for drilling. The Prime Minister says it will boost Britain's energy independence. But environmental campaigners say more drilling for fossil fuels flies in the face of the science around climate change. The government has also announced £20 billion worth of backing for 2 new carbon capture projects. Here's our political correspondent, Ione Wells.
July saw the world heating up. Now, political debates around energy and climate change are hotting up too. The government has said it will back hundreds of new licences for oil and gas production sites like this in the North Sea. It's also confirmed it will support 2 new carbon capture and storage projects in north-east Scotland and the Humber. These would capture carbon dioxide where fossil fuels are burnt and pipe it under the sea to store it. Climate campaigners fear it's a tactic to keep the fossil fuel industry in business. The Prime Minister, on a visit to Aberdeenshire, argued today's announcements would help the UK reach its net zero target by 2050 while still backing new oil and gas.
Even in 2050, when we are at net zero, it is forecast that around a quarter of our energy needs will still come from oil and gas. That's why technologies like carbon capture and storage are important. But what is important then is that we get that oil and gas in the best possible way, and that means getting it from here at home.
The Conservatives have been keen to draw a dividing line with the Labour Party. Labour say it would not back new oil and gas licences, arguing they would be bad for the climate, not cut bills or create long-term jobs, and they would instead focus on investing in renewable alternatives.
Quite frankly, I'm astonished that Rishi Sunak is doubling down on his failing and weak policy on climate action. Businesses and individuals and families have suffered 13 years of failing Tory energy policy. That has left us the worst hit of any Western European country during this energy crisis.
The SNP say it's important to keep the oil and gas workforce in Scotland employed, but have called for a just transition towards greener jobs.
This is a nuanced discussion that needs a grown-up approach, not the drill baby drill approach that the Westminster government is taking here at this moment in time, which ignores the reality of energy security in the years to come and the lack of investment that they're putting into renewables, but also it ignores the reality of the climate crisis that we face.
The Prime Minister faces tensions in his own party too, with some Tory MPs calling on the Prime Minister to water down the net zero target, others accusing him of being on the wrong side of history by backing more oil and gas, dividing lines that are only set to grow as the next election nears. Ione Wells, BBC News.
So, would those carbon capture projects announced today by the government be enough to offset the new push to drill for more oil and gas? Well, here's our climate editor, Justin Roller. Justin.
Thank you, Ben. Well, powering up Britain from Britain is the Prime Minister's slogan. He says he wants to max out oil and gas production from UK reserves. Many climate scientists and environmentalists say the carbon dioxide emissions from these new projects will bust through the UK's climate targets. So will the carbon capture and storage projects he's announced today offset the emissions? Carbon capture and storage plants are designed to trap that planet-warming CO2 or take it directly from the atmosphere and store it underground. Take this gas-fired power station, for example. As the natural gas is burned to produce electricity, the carbon dioxide is separated out. It's pumped underground to be stored in empty gas and oil reservoirs. The government has announced investments in a plant in St Fergus on the northeast coast of Scotland and another on the Humber. It has already announced plans for 2 other such plants. Government advisors say this technology is vital to meet net zero climate targets.
Most sectors we can get to zero emissions, but there's a few where we still expect to have emissions in the future. So think of the steel sector, for example, or the cement sector, possibly aviation, even farming. So emissions continuing actually past 2050 and beyond. So we need carbon capture to reduce emissions to zero in those sectors or close to zero, and actually to remove greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere and store those away too. We also need that carbon capture technology.
Some environmentalists and climate scientists say carbon capture and storage is a dangerous distraction that could give polluters a licence to carry on polluting. And the cash the government is announcing is to try and kickstart a new industry. It will be many years before it will be capable of trapping the millions of tonnes of CO2 these new oil and gas fields will produce. And there's another issue: the UK's ability to lead on climate. Why would other countries listen if the UK urges them to scale down oil and gas production when it is chasing down its last reserves of oil and gas? Ben.
Justin, thank you. And we can go to our correspondent now, Rebecca Curran, who's in St Fergus in Aberdeenshire, which, as Justin just mentioned, is one of those carbon capture projects. Rebecca, what is this going to mean for the area there where you are?
Well, Ben, as you mentioned, you can see behind me the St Fergus gas terminal, and on any given day it supplies up to 15% of the UK's gas. So it's already fulfilling an important job for the UK's energy needs. But this will come as a welcome boost to this area and beyond, with the estimate of around 21,000 new jobs. But there is a bit of history here, and people here might be forgiven for thinking, I'll believe it when I see it, because over the years there have been many promises and pledges for similar carbon capture schemes that for one reason or another haven't come to fruition. But the news has been broadly welcomed. The business community say the carbon capture and storage scheme will provide innovation and also those new jobs, and that the new licences signal a vote of confidence in the North Sea sector. Now, that is not a view shared by Scotland's First Minister Humza Yousaf. He says that the Prime Minister has effectively signalled that his government is not serious about tackling the climate emergency when it comes to issuing these new licences, and that is a view held by many environmental groups too. But people here will be digesting the news and really looking for some more detail about timescales and just exactly how much money will be coming for the Acorn project.
Rebecca, thank you very much. Rebecca Curran there for us in St Fergus. Ukrainian troops are continuing to make advances around the city of Bakhmut in the east of the country. Russia captured it earlier this year after intense fighting, and the battle for Bakhmut has become one of huge symbolic importance in the war between Ukraine and Russia. Well, our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale has been given access to a team of elite Ukrainian snipers there. They are called the Ghosts of Bakhmut.
We're on our way to a secret location, a place they call the edge of existence. Behind the wheel, the man simply known as Ghost. He tells me his team of snipers are all known as the Ghosts of Bakhmut because they silently bring death. Their base is already well within range of Russian artillery.
That was close.
But they'll be going even closer towards enemy lines.
You can hide from artillery, but not from snipers.
And their work is more precise than the shelling.
Do you know how many Russians your team have killed?
Yes, the confirmed number is 524. 76 of those are mine.
The ghosts have been operating on the edges of Bakhmut for the past 6 months, often looking for high-value Russian targets. They record every kill through their sights. Kuzia will be the marksman for tonight's mission. Before the war, he worked in a factory.
When I was a civilian, I didn't like weapons. But now I've had to take up arms to defend my country. Of course I'm scared. Only a fool wouldn't be.
A quick blessing. We leave with dusk approaching. The music to lift the mood and mask the sound of artillery. Several times the driver, Kucht, warns incoming. They wear British-supplied uniforms. The insertion of the team can often be the most dangerous part of the mission. From here, they'll have to walk another mile to reach their target.
And that's a big explosion.
We soon discover that shrapnel has torn through one of the back tires. It's a long, nerve-wracking limp home. Now the anxious wait for the team's return. Go says he hand-picked each man for their patriotism. While he waits for news, he calls his 7-year-old daughter. He's already taught her how to strip a gun. 7 hours later, the two-man team are extracted. Early morning, just before the shelling resumes. The relief is palpable. Kuzia, the sniper, says the mission was a success.
Just one shot.
One shot, one target, he says. The commander, Ghost, is just relieved they're safe.
Every trip could be our last, but we are doing a noble deed.
It's also part of Ukraine's psychological warfare. Killing from a place that can't be seen, and with a sound that can't be heard. Jonathan Beale, BBC News, Bakhmut.
And the time is just coming up to 18 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. A British man who killed his seriously ill wife walks free from a court in Cyprus. David Hunter was jailed for 2 years, but the court decided he spent long enough in custody. And coming up, we'll be talking to Britain's first black female TV reporter, half a century after she made her debut on screen.
And coming up on BBC News, defeats today for Scotland and Wales at the Netball World Cup. A little later, it's England's turn as they take on Tonga.
Local authorities across the UK say some vulnerable people are waiting years for the social care that they need. Research for the BBC suggests that in around a quarter of council areas, some had to wait more than a month on average just to be assessed for social care. And that's having a knock-on effect on the National Health Service as patients become stuck in hospitals, meaning fewer beds are available. Here's Wira Davis.
I can't afford to waste time at my age. I could go it any day.
Lily is 96 years old. She's frail and needs help with everyday tasks. But in the words of her friends, she's as sharp as a tack and she knows what she wants.
I have to get out. I've had enough. I can't stand any more of it.
Lily's been in hospital for 11 months and is a striking example of a common problem. A patient well enough to go home, but unable to leave hospital because there's no care available. With the help of friends, she's been keeping a video diary.
So what's stopping you now from going home?
No carers.
No carers.
You know, she's just waiting. You can't find any carers that will care for me. There are a lot of people like me, and we're holding up beds and everything. So they should be pushing us out, really.
I'm lying here in the praying position.
The praying position, yes.
Carers like Rebecca and Jessica, who work here in the Vale of Glamorgan, love their jobs but are under daily pressures. For retired policeman Nigel, who has multiple sclerosis, they're crucial for his quality of life after he spent 3 months waiting for care.
If it wasn't for the carers, at this time of the day now, I would be stuck in the bed. It's like solitary confinement.
But the system is under huge strain. We found that private companies have handed back thousands of care contracts to councils across the UK, the equivalent of more than 70,000 hours. Staffing was the most common reason.
Our local Asda's pays £13 to start with, and to start you off with no previous experience, so we can't really compete.
The reported staffing crisis in the care sector has a direct impact on the availability of beds in hospitals across the UK.
So today we've got 58 patients who are what we call medically fit for discharge. That's nearly 3 wards of patients that do not need to be here. It's not sustainable, and I think something does need to change.
We've been told many times that higher pay for carers and extra money for councils to make that happen might be part of the solution here. But where might that money come from?
This is the necessary spending on social care that's going up.
5 years ago, Jerry Holtham wrote a paper for the Welsh Government, anticipating the inevitable rising cost of care. His conclusions then haven't changed.
The basic notion of a ring-fence tax to cope with social care, I think, still has to be on the table.
The UK government and the devolved administrations do have the powers to raise taxes to pay for social care if they wanted. They say they are spending billions more, but councils say much of that is being soaked up by rising costs. At least Lily, after waiting almost a year, is now going home.
Oh, my trees, some of the trees are still there.
2 carers visit 4 times daily, allowing her to live as she wishes. So what's it like to be back home?
Wonderful. Bubbling over inside of me, the fact that I'm home.
The Vale of Glamorgan Council has apologised unreservedly for the delay, and although a health board said the level of care she needed contributed to her stay in hospital, it understood her concerns. Lily is just glad to be home and finally enjoying the view from her own window. Willa Davis, BBC News.
In Pakistan, police are still investigating who was behind yesterday's bombing at a political rally which left 45 people dead. More than 150 others were injured in the suicide bomb attack. Well, our Pakistan correspondent Caroline Davis is in Islamabad for us this lunchtime. Caroline, what is the latest on this?
Ben, the first notification we had this morning was from the police confirming that this was a suicide bombing. Yesterday they said there was evidence to suggest it might be. Today they confirmed it and said that they believe that the suicide bomber used about 10 kilograms of explosive and had ball bearings in order to create maximum amount of damage and destruction. We know that the number of dead has now risen to 45 and the number of injured is around 150. Now, no group has yet claimed this attack and the authorities have refuted the idea that the so-called Islamic State is behind it. But what they've said instead is that there are some indications that a local chapter with links to the so-called Islamic State might have been involved. That sounds like a contradictory statement, but in fact it shows the fact that how often these militant groups are splintered and fractured and so do sometimes operate independently.
OK, Caroline, thank you very much indeed. Caroline Davis there for us in Islamabad. Now, this month marks 55 years since Britain's first black female TV reporter made her debut. In the 1960s, Barbara Blake Hannah, like many others of the Windrush generation, came to the UK in search of new opportunities, but she faced constant racism. And after 8 years, she returned to Jamaica. Well, she's been talking to the BBC's Simi Jolowoshu.
July 31st, 1968. The Times newspaper printed a spread on Barbara Blake Hannah. The night before, she'd become the first black woman to report the news on British television.
Yes, to be in the Times, the whole page. To be a journalist on television is the highest place for a journalist to be. And I'd achieved that. That was really cool. That was really nice.
Barbara reported on community stories for Eamon Andrews' show on Thames Television. That was until her contract came to an end after just 9 months. Too many viewers had complained about having a black person on their screens.
What can you just have to accept it? You know, that was all part of the, you're not good enough. You're black, you're not good enough. Racism was a big awakening.
She later got a job on ATV, a regional channel based in Birmingham, but things didn't improve during her 6 months there.
The racism was more pronounced in Birmingham, on the set and on the streets. We were at a party at a bar. A glass broke and Splinter jumped up and cut me, and some drunk white girl said, "Oh, it's red," like she thought my blood was going to be another colour.
How did you cope with all the racism that you faced in the UK? Because you were there for about 8 years.
You would ignore it. You ignore that kind of behaviour as best you can. Some people can't. I guess I learned how to, at least for 8 years, until I thought enough is enough, time to leave. You know, why stay where you're hated?
Barbara moved behind the scenes working on films and TV shows. She championed Jamaica's arts and culture and founded the Reggae Film Festival. She also continued her journalism, interviewing celebrities and politicians. In 1984, she herself became Jamaica's first Rastafari senator. Barbara later received an Order of Distinction from the Jamaican government. But to her, one accomplishment matters the most.
My greatest achievement is having had a child, being a mother. Having had a wonderful child, my son Makonnen. All my awards and medals, these are just special gifts along the way.
Now 82, Barbara hopes her legacy will inspire others. Simi Jalalsho, BBC News, Kingston, Jamaica.
Football now, and England take on China in their final group match of the Women's World Cup in Adelaide tomorrow, but they will have to do it without one of their star players. Midfielder Keira Walsh is injured and can't play in a match that England simply must not lose. Well, Jane Dougal is in Adelaide for us now. Jane.
Yes, Ben, England's pre-match media conference ended just a few hours ago, and there were many questions about Keira Walsh. We knew that she wouldn't be fit enough to play in England's match against China tomorrow, but we didn't know the extent of her injury or if she would be ruled out for the remainder of the tournament. Well, England manager Sarina Wiegman held her cards close to her chest when she was asked about that very thing. She said she didn't know the extent of the injury, only that it was not her anterior cruciate ligament, which is good news. But Wiegman might well want to play down the absence of one of her best players to the opposition because, well, Keira Walsh is probably one of the best midfielders in the world. She was sold to Barcelona from Manchester City for a record fee, a world record fee, and without her, it might hamper England's chances of progressing in this tournament. They will miss her sorely in tomorrow's match against China. Now, if England are to get through to the knockout stages, they will want to top their group, and that means that they will be guaranteed to go through, but they will have to beat China to do that. If they draw and other results go their way, then they'll come second. They'll still get through, but if they lose, then it gets complicated, and it's already difficult enough without the linchpin of their squad. Ben.
Jane, thank you very much. And that takes us now to the cricket, and it's all to play for on the last day of the final Ashes test at the Oval. Australia are chasing 384 to win, but England's bowlers have taken 3 wickets so far, and Joe Wilson has been watching the action.
Well, I feel your pain. You'd want to watch, because at the Oval everything was still variable. So many scenarios still possible, even on the Ashes final day. Here we go. Chris Wokes to David Warner to Johnny Bairstow.
This is gone, surely he's gone.
Australia had to reach 384. England needed 10 wickets. This made it 140 for 1. Immediate progress. 14 years into his Australian career, Warner had surely played his last Ashes innings. Usman Khawaja had been utterly immovable yesterday. Over to the umpire, LBW. Wokes and England had another. Look at Ben Stokes' reaction to England's start. This is the last day of Stuart Broad's career, bowling now to Marnus Labuschagne. Spot on with that shot. Labuschagne on 13 and no more. The hands of Zach Crawley, the power of Mark Wood. 3 key batters removed in the first hour of play. Just to get rid of Steve Smith. Well, he'd do things his way, like he always does, living every moment. Up and down, back and forth, the fortunes of this final day. James Anderson bowling. A 4 from Travis Head makes the bowler scratch his head. Think again, that's the game. Remember, every run takes Australia closer to victory in the Ashes hours which remain.
And the lunchtime score, Australia 238 for 3. But a big moment just now, Ben, because Ben Stokes took a catch above his head as his arm came down, the ball came out. Umpire said, not out. That was Steve Smith reprieved. And I just wonder, the clouds behind me, the floodlights, what part the weather may yet play as the game moves on this afternoon.
Yeah, Joe, we're always wondering about the weather. Thank you very much indeed. And let's get the latest forecast for you now from Stav Danaos.
Thanks very much, Ben. No, not good today or Wednesday for the cricket, Ben, but low pressure will be dominating our weather for the rest of this week. It has been very wet so far for many areas through July. The skies above Lynmouth there in Devon pretty much depict what it's like across the UK at the moment. Outbreaks of fairly heavy rain in places, and we'll continue with low pressure dominating through the week and feeling rather cool for the time of year. Now, I mentioned July has been very wet, record-breaking so for some areas. We've seen double the amount we usually see in a normal July. Preston, Lancashire, 3 times the amount of rain that we usually see in a normal July. And there is a lot more to come to start to August. This is the area of low pressure I'm talking about, sitting across us at the moment, bringing cloudy skies, quite breezy conditions as well across southern Britain. Barely any sunshine around, probably the best of it. In fact, the far north of Scotland into the northern Isles. You've been enjoying a nice afternoon there with some sunshine. Elsewhere, it is wet, widespread rain in here and there. Some drier interludes, but it will stay rather cloudy. Winds will be lighter across the north of the country, quite breezy though, across southern Britain, particularly through the channel there. So, of course, all that cloud, the wind, the rain will impact the temperatures, the high teens, just about low 20s in the south, feeling quite humid and muggy, murky in the south too. Now, as we move through this evening and overnight, that area of low pressure clears out to the North Sea, so conditions improve a little bit. We'll see clearer spells, still some rain through central areas. A muggy feel to things in the south, the low to mid-teens, a little bit lower than that further north. So actually Tuesday, a little bit quieter, I think. It looks like we should see more sunshine around, the clouds breaking, certainly across Scotland. We'll have a zone of cloudy or wet weather, Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, northern England. Either side of that, I don't think it's looking too bad at all, bar the odd shower. It should be a drier. So I think the temperature's a bit higher, 22 degrees in the south, again the high teens in the north, but it doesn't last. Here comes the next system, and this is unusually deep for early August, spreading across the country, bringing gales across the south, outbreaks of heavy rain at times. So that's a pretty messy picture for early August. Again, probably northern Scotland seeing the best of the conditions with some sunshine, but elsewhere, certainly England and Wales, heavy, maybe thundery rain, and we'll see gales through the channel, gusts even inland, 30, 40 miles an hour, maybe up to 45 miles an hour. So that'll impact the temperatures. Again, high teens for most of us, could see 20 or 21 Celsius. It stays unsettled for the end of the week. Another area of low pressure arriving just in time for the weekend. Ben.
All right, Stav, thank you very much indeed. And that is today's BBC News at 1. The news does continue here on BBC One. Now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and the regions for the news where you are. But from me, do have a very good afternoon.